The Holy Gospel is written in the 16th chapter of St. Luke, beginning at the first verse. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him, and he said to him, 'What is this I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' Then the manager said to himself, 'What will I do now that my master is taking the position away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I've decided what to do. When I am dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes.' So, summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil.' He said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 50. Then he asked another, 'And how much do you owe?' He replied, 100 containers of wheat.' He said to him, 'Take your bill and make it 80. And his master commanded the dishonest manager, because he had acted shrewdly, for the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourself by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much, and whoever is dishonest in very little is dishonest also in much. If then you have been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust you to the true riches? And if you have not been faithful with that which belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." Here ends the gospel for the day. Please be seated. Dan Miller, in his book, No Dreaded Mondays, gives a story which I think is very relevant to today's gospel text. He talks about a man in India who, because of his diligence and work, had accumulated a lot of money. And one of the things he decided to do was kind of become a banker for the town in which he lived. And so he constantly was lending money and having to collect it back. In one case, he had lent a farmer a great deal of money, and the day of reckoning, the day of collecting the debt, came. Now, when the man came to the entrepreneur or the lender, he said, "I just don't have enough money to pay you back." And he said, "Well, I'm sorry, but today is the day and we will collect." Again, the farmer protested, "I don't have any money to pay you." "Well then," said the lender, "let me give you a proposal." And the farmer had a beautiful daughter. Now, all farmers have beautiful daughters stories, right? And this man wanted to marry his daughter. So he said, "I'll give you a solution to the problem that we have. I have a little bag here, and in that bag I will gather up 2 pebbles from the ground, one of them white, one of them black. Now your daughter will reach in and pick one out, and if it's black, she marries me, and the debt is forgiven. Now she picks the white one, the debt is also forgiven, but you don't have to marry me." She doesn't have to marry me. "And if she refuses to make a selection, then you will be immediately thrown into prison until the debt is paid." Okay, so this presents the young girl with a problem. She doesn't want to marry the man. So she watches as the man picks up the pebbles, and she is very, very observant. She noticed that he picks up 2 black pebbles. Okay, so now you have a solution. How would you recommend that she act? If she refuses to put her hand in the bag, immediately her father is locked up for good. If she reaches into the bag, she knows there's 2 black pebbles. He said, if he pulls out the black pebble, then I have to marry him, but the debt will be forgiven. And if I just see tell him what I've just seen and accuse him of being a cheat and dishonest, that'll sever the relationship. The debt still has to be paid. My father is thrown into jail, and my life will be a mess. So what does she do? She reaches into the bag diligently as if she is following the orders of the lender. And she pulls out a pebble, drops it on the ground, and she said, "Oh my, how clumsy of me. I've dropped the pebble and I don't know where it is." But she said, "I have a solution. You had a white and a black pebble in there. We just look into the bag and see which one is left, and obviously I've taken the other one." We like that story, don't we? We like the story when somebody is just on very, very edgy in their thinking, and they get a solution to a problem that seems unsolvable. We have a lot of visitors that come to the church, and one of the things that they remark about very often is our singing of the patriotic hymn at the end of the service. Now, a couple of weeks ago, somebody was here from quite a distant state, and they came down and they remarked about the patriotic hymn during the service. And he said, "Aren't you afraid you're going to get in trouble?" And I said, "In trouble for what?" "Well, that probably is not something that the religious elite think is a good thing. We don't just install a patriotic hymn in a service and call it that as if we're worshiping the government rather than the church." She said, "Aren't you worried that you're going to be called on that?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Why not?" And I said, "Because we don't sing a patriotic hymn during the service." And he said, "What do you mean you don't serve it? I just heard it. I was just at the service." I said, "Oh yes, but the service ends at the benediction, or if worse, closing hymn. Just happens that after the service is over, all of our members like to sing a patriotic hymn before they leave. It has nothing to do with the service." He said, "Oh, you know the rules, don't you?" And I said, "You got to know the rules if you want to bend them." See, we like stories like that, where somebody is trying to get the best of us, and somehow we, through proper reasoning, discover a solution to the problem. Now, this all ties in with our text today. It is one of the most troublesome texts that we have in the Bible, and I'm sure Jesus had a twinkle in his eye when he was telling the apostles this story, this parable, and I'm sure that he has a twinkle in his eye every Sunday, every time he come up with this text. The 18th Sunday after Pentecost, 3 times every 3 years, we have this text. And what is so troubling about it, and clergy wrestle with us on a regular basis, here's a story about a man that's dishonest. He's fired from his job, and he's given a couple of weeks to make his books and give them back to the owner. And what he does is he calls in all the people who owe the master some money, and he writes off part of the debt. In one case, 50%. And the purpose is to make sure that he has friends once he's fired. He's discovered a way to warm himself to the other people, and he's looked out for his future after he's fired. Now we look at this and say, what is Jesus doing? He's commending this guy who is dishonest in the first place, and then start to write off the debts for the guy that he works for. What kind of justification is there? What is Jesus talking about? What's his emphasis? Well, there have been a lot of attempts at trying to come up with an explanation. One is this. Sometimes the sermon centers on praise for forgiveness because this is a symbol of forgiveness when it is really not really deserved. As a matter of fact, the master commends the servant and keeps him in his hire. And this follows the story of the prodigal son, where there is a son that kind of breaks all the traditions of his upbringing and shames his father, goes out and spends his inheritance, half the money that his father had in riotous living, and he comes home and he's forgiven unconditionally. Isn't this the same kind of story? Well, I have a little problem with that interpretation because it really doesn't seem to stand up to the test. Then there are some that explain this as a parable about money, and Luke seems to go right into talking about money after this parable is told, and talks about using wealth and not putting a lot of trust in it, but using it in any way you can to endear yourself to other people while you're on earth, and it might give you ability to proclaim the message more freely. Well, I don't think that one stands up either. What I see as the emphasis on this text, and I think it's alluded to in your little introduction, is that he's praising the ingenuity and the intuitiveness of the servant. The man didn't look at himself and say, "Oh, poor me, I am fired. Oh, what can I do?" He immediately sought a way to rectify the problem, and he did it with a certain amount of ingenuity and initiative. And the praise comes to the man for not suffering and stooping in his own squalor, but it says you're willing to go out and do something, and you do it quickly. And then there's this odd phrase that Luke puts into the story. And maybe it's something that we as a church really ought to pay attention to. He said, sometimes the children of darkness are much better about taking care of things than the children of light. Think about that for a moment. Sometimes the children of darkness are better at taking care of things than the children of light. They have a problem, they deal with it. They don't run away from it. They don't ignore it. They don't make some fluffy, nice suggestion about it. They deal with it, and they usually deal with it quickly. One of the things that I don't understand about the church, and because I always worked in a dual position, in a secular occupation and a religious, it's easy to see how the other half does their business. But now, when a minister leaves a parish, and I have talked to the council about this because sometime in the future it'll come up. Why does the church, when somebody leaves the place of employment, and that's what it is, even though it's a call by the Spirit, when they leave an appointment, the church comes in and they says, well, let's take a year break from having a minister. Let's have an interim minister, and for a year we will give you copies of a form to fill out in which you can talk about what you're looking for, and if there are problems in the congregation, we will referee those during the time you don't have a permanent minister. So when the permanent minister comes in, all the things will be clean. All the things will be settled. Everybody will be happy. Everybody will be in agreement. Now, isn't that the dumbest thing you ever heard in your life? I mean, can you imagine Apple Computer saying, well, our CEO died, so let's wait for a year take in somebody who really isn't a part of the business world anymore, and let him sit and play around with things until we sit and agree on things that are a problem with Apple and a problem with the employees, and get them all settled, so when the new CEO comes in, he can come into a clean business. No, you hire a CEO right on the spot when the other one leaves, because he's the one responsible for taking care of the problems. I had a lot of moments, and those people who were with us yesterday at the second meeting of the small churches understand that I have difficulties with a lot of things that come up. And so they said, the leader said, we're going to deal in the Word today. And what we will do is we will have a male read this, and then we will have a female read this. And she said that last time we met too. And so I know that's something dealing with this appropriateness and way to deal with things today in a nice way so we don't offend anybody. So yesterday I shot out and I said, why do we have to read it twice? Well, she went into discussing, well, it sounds different from a male and a female. And I said, just let a female read it. I'm okay with it. Well, she had a male read it, and then she read it herself, the second. That's crazy. I said, what are we doing in the church with this appropriateness? Sometimes you have to just deal with things. And we weren't dealing with the problems that small churches had. Sometimes the children of darkness are better at solving problems than the children of light, because they don't run away, they don't pretend it doesn't exist, they don't deal with appropriateness, they deal with the reality of the problem on hand. You ever heard the phrase, work like the Dickens? That's an abbreviation from work like the devil. If they tell you to get things done, work like the Dickens. Why? Because the Luther said the devil is always working overtime, always hard, because he's intense on his work. And sometimes we as Christians lay back and let a lot of things happen with injustice, intolerance, all kinds of problems, and don't do anything because we're the children of light and we want to deal with things with political correctness. Jesus said people have got to become beyond nice. Like the manager sold out for a purpose, but sold out for the purpose of righteousness, justice, and peace. Maybe this parable is about extravagant grace and forgiveness. Maybe it's about the dangers of wealth. And maybe it's just saying, when problems come, don't ignore them, don't run away from them. Sell out to Jesus and get the job done. Amen.